Well, thank you very much. I really am very grateful. I'm thankful for the invitation. I'm, of course, very happy to be here. I've been in this building before. It's a very impressive building, and I'm happy to be sort of talking about the report, which by all means seems to be extremely good and very timely, because, as it said, the wealth inequality in Germany is very high. We will talk about that also in a moment, but let me sort of bring this whole discussion at more, how should I say, maybe slightly more abstract level based on my book, Capitalism Alone. What I call the endogenous forces that lead towards the increased inequality is something that I would actually define in a moment. But let me, for the very beginning, start with very simple differences between various capitalisms and actually look in a historical perspective. In a classical type of capitalism that were studied by Smith, Ricardo, and Marx and others, we basically have workers and capitalists. One set of people have labor or labor power as their only asset. The other set of people have capital goods, wealth as an asset. They are totally divided. You see on this line, actually, basically, that's obviously simplification. Workers have a distribution. In terms of income inequality and put them all together, it translates here into the labor income, which increases from bottom, let's say subsistence, to a certain higher level, and then to an exponential increase in capital income. What is important to realize, and it was mentioned before, capital has this tendency simply because there is a multiplying process. When you have R multiplied by K, you have obvious tendency to actually move towards a much more extreme distribution. And for example, I draw it here exponentially. Now, what is the situation in the meritocratic capitalism or liberal capitalism? Let's suppose, for the sake of the argument, you also have labor income unequally distributed as you had it before, but capital income is now distributed differently. In other words, you have a given percentage of people, 30% approximately, both in the US and Germany, with zero or negative net assets, and then you have this rapid increase, and what you notice here at the very top, you have actually capital income becoming much more important than labor income at the very, very top. So now let me stop here and just say, suppose another sort of type of capitalism, which I didn't draw here because I wanted to reduce the number of slides, where you have inequality, which still exists, but there is no inequality in the compositional structure. In other words, suppose that everybody has the same shares of capital and labor income. So you have 100 from labor and 200 from capital. I have 10 from labor and 20 from capital. So why is it important? It's not going to change your overall inequality, but what it would change is that it would, let me just go to this formula. Well, what it would change is that there will be no direct transmission for increased inequality in capital incomes into income inequality. So let me just do it very simply. You will not have an automatic increase from the rising capital share into a higher Gini coefficient of income. This is the main point. Why we are actually having problem with high wealth. We might have problem because high wealth lead to the political capture and other things. But it automatically translates with the rising capital share into the higher Gini coefficient of disposable income. And actually, this is the main point. So let us look at these systemic inequalities in liberal meritocratic capitalism. I will not go through all of them because there are some of them which are not necessarily relevant for what we are talking today, but I will go through some of them. We start with the fact that the labor share has been on the decline in the last 30 years. And that's the case in many countries. This is the case of the G7. There is also the case of OECD countries. There is also a case of China. And this is something which we might expect in the future to continue because of the rising importance of robotic, automatics, and artificial intelligence. So essentially, let's take it as a given that the labor share will continue to decline and consequently capital share to go up. What is the problem there? Capital is heavily concentrated amongst the rich, as we have already seen. So they are really important to realize here. We are not only talking about owned concentration of capital income. We are talking about high concentration of capital income plus high correlation between that capital income and total income. So that's the issue, and that's where the transmission comes from. And that's why we basically move from the functional income distribution, which is capital / against labor, into the interpersonal income distribution. And this is the simplest possible decomposition formula. The Gini coefficient is equal to the share, S are shares of capital and labor, multiplied by the concentration coefficients. So what happens if S of capital, S sub k, goes up as we have just assumed, and if the concentration of capital is extremely high, you are going to have immediate an increase in disposable income inequality. So then the question becomes, what do we do with that? And then I will come to the end to a few possible solutions. This is not something new, but I want really to make people understand that when we talk about wealth inequality, as we do talk today, we are also talking about inequality in capital income, which is a flow. Wealth is a stock, but that stock generates annual flows, which then influence income inequality on an annual basis. So what are let me give you the illustration. This is based on social economic panel in Germany, being lissified by the Luxembourg Income Study. Again, there is nothing special here about Germany per se, but you see the capital, the concentration of capital being, of course, a 0.9, and the concentration of labor incomes being about 0.4 to 0.5. Now, if you were to look, this is very hard to see actually because these are small. There are 4 countries on a single slide. Of course, when you look at it very carefully, you would see actually in Germany, for example, for labor income, you would see the effect of the changes, hard changes. You would see that there. You would see also this rising concentration of capital in the last 7 or 8 years. This is basically the same database that was used before, but now looking at flows. You would notice, of course, for the US and the UK, more or less the same story. So capital is always much more concentrated than labor, and that's the problem when that particular type of income rises. If you look at total the distribution of capital by percentile and its share in disposable income, again, nothing especially new here. As you can see, there are two lines here. One is total amount of capital that people have at different percentiles of income distribution. You notice that practically people at the first 1/2 have no significant capital income. Last night I looked actually for the US and I said, okay, at what percentile do you come? First of all, about 40% have 0. And then at what percentile do you come with $100 annually? And you need to go to the 57th percentile of income distribution. So this is $100 annually. So it means like $8 per month. So obviously nothing important. In order to come to a $10,000 of capital income, you need to go to the 94th percentile. So the essential gain with capitals happens, other than housing, happens really at the top 5%. One can basically disregard whatever happens below that. And that's the sort of the truth, the sad truth, if you will. Then there is a second problem, that the rate of return on larger assets tends to be higher. and that by itself is disequalizing. So if I have $1,000, I would make, as you quite well know, as these days, you would make 0 to 1 or 2%, and actually in real terms, you might actually negative return. But if you have 10 million, you would find investment advice and bankers and others who would actually make you make 7 or 8%. I recently read actually huge disparity in the, especially now, in the returns on wealth, on unit of wealth, $1, €1, depending on how much money has been invested. You know, nobody is going to give you great advice if you have €1,000 and go to the bank. So that was another problem, and of course we know that, this is from the work by Eric Zwick, we know that it works in real life exactly like that. So that's another disequalizing force. Now, and finally I want to come to something which is actually in my book, which I called homoplutia. This is, of course, when we have a new phenomenon, we just sort of go back to Greek and put together two words. Homo obviously means the same, plutia, wealth. So the idea here is the following. Before you look at this graph and try to understand what it means, let me explain what the graph is supposed to show. We notice increasingly that in advanced capitalist countries, the top 10%, which is the top decile, is composed increasingly of people there who are both rich in terms of labor income and capital income. And what is interesting is that about, as you will show that in a minute, in Germany or the US or Spain, about 1/3 of the people who are the richest in total income are also richest in labor income and capital income. Now, go back to the classics. Well, for the classics, it was inconceivable. Because if you're really rich capitalist, you're not going to have high labor income. If you're rich capitalist, you will have 0 labor income. And look now here at this graph. The countries, let's start with the country on the bottom, which is Mexico, and I have data for Mexico and Brazil. They actually have very few people who are rich and who are also rich in capital income and labor income, because they are more standard capitalist countries where rich capitalists do not really double up as hired workers. But then look at the green line, which is Germany. There is really this sort of a peak, which I don't understand why. Maybe there were some data issues there. But nevertheless, you find Germany, the green line, and the US blue line as very high and rising. So that's what I was saying. 1/3 basically of people in the top decile are labor and capital rich. Now that has implications also. This is the same story with different more countries. Simply here, as you see, Germany is this is like the average. 23% of people in that group of the richest are both rich in labor and capital. It has many implications. First, for taxation. Secondly, transmission of that wealth. Thirdly, security of that income, because let's suppose that everything goes down in the stock market, you have high labor incomes. Let's suppose that actually for some reason, you know, your particular profession loses, you have high capital income. So it's very difficult. It's also difficult for taxation, because when you tax people only with high capital income, you can say, well, basically these people, we can tax them, they are maybe just making money out of dividends in here. But here you have hard-working labor people who also have capital assets. So this is, I think, an interesting phenomenon that in a classical world would be inconceivable. I will go very quickly over that, because we actually have a paper when we look at this homoplutia and how much it has influenced increase in inequality in the US. And I think it would be interesting to actually apply it elsewhere. These are all different sources of US data that all show the increase in that particular type of wealth, both labor and capital wealth, and we actually claim that 1/5 of the increase in US inequality can be explained by homoplutia. So last point, and I would actually now finish, is another sort of way of transmission of that high, inequality and social advantage across generations is homogamy. Now, homogamy is increasing percentage of people who marry people who are on a similar asset or income position. And this is, again, the American data. I've actually seen somebody actually doing the same thing for Germany. I take this from my book, so unfortunately I didn't put the German data, but they are very similar. In other words, what this graph shows you, the blue line was the percentage of people, this is about males, men marrying actually women who are in a low income bracket by labor income. So it's actually, we just look at people with labor income. We don't want to mix things up with people who are not employed. And the red line shows you the percentage who choose as a partner somebody from the high, if they are already, the men here are from the high income level, and then they choose a partner also who is from the high income level. So whereas like in the 1970s, your probability if you're a high earning male was 1-to-1, whether you would select a low earning partner or a high earning partner, the probability now, as you can see, the ratio of probabilities is, what is this? It's about 3-to-1. For women, actually, it is, I was saving the slides, but for women is actually more than 3-to-1. So the change for women is even more dramatic than for men. And then finally, the outcome of all of that, this is the data on market income, basically the story that we know, shrinking size of the middle classes. I put them all on the same scale. You notice in Germany also, but you know, there was a decline, but the German middle class defined as the share of the four middle deciles in market income, which is before redistribution. As you notice, there was a decline from in the 1980s and the 90s, then it's gotten stabilized. But basically, all countries shown here, even the famous Denmark, it was very famous in the US, as the US trying to become a Denmark, even Denmark shows the decline of that middle class share. So let me just finish. This is the usual story of a graph between Germany and the US. As you notice, the Germany market income is also increased very significantly over the last 40 years. The Gini coefficient of market income is at the top, then the Gini coefficient, this is the blue line. The red line is the Gini coefficient of gross income. As you noticed in the case of Germany, very large decrease because of government transfers and direct taxation. There is also a large increase in the US, but not as big. And then finally, the green line is when you actually take out direct taxation as well. So obviously, this is the disposable income inequality. The green line is something that you would see in the newspapers as disposable income inequality. But of course, the underlying one is this very high and rising over the period until about 2000, I believe, very much rising the market income inequality. And so this is, I will finish. Do I have 2 more minutes? One, I will finish. This is the same story, but now told only for the top market income decile, the same people. So this is very important. You know, when you do the Gini coefficient between market and gross, you re-rank people. But here, I don't re-rank people. I just look at the market income share of the top decile and how their share declines when you introduce taxation and government transfers. So you notice that their share, which actually starts with something like 35% in Germany, so it's 3.5 times higher than average, then actually is being then reduced to 25. So 11 percentage points. And that's the last. What happens to the bottom market share? It's actually quite interesting to look at each particular decile. Both US and Germany are at 0, so practically 0. These people at the bottom have no market income. But notice much greater increase in the German case than the American case. However, notice also that it seems that they are actually, the increase has become less more recently compared to the past. So in other words, there is, of course, a significant increase. This is social assistance, unemployment benefits, all things which are income tested. But the strength of that seems to have become smaller. And the strength of that seems to become smaller not only for the bottom decile, but even for the second decile. And of course, I've done that for all of 10, but I will not show you this. But it does show, actually, I think, somewhat strikingly, if you look at this graph, somewhat strikingly in the power of the welfare state to actually bring you from 0 to a number which is, you know, in this case, reasonable of like 8% share your share in total income. But it also shows you that if the underlying market income inequality is increasing and the shares of the bottom tend towards zero and to be very small, then there is no magic there. In other words, unless you really have an enormous distribution, these people, of course, will become better off, but they would remain very much poor. So I would stop here, and I think there is actually lots of other things that we can discuss during the next part of the session. Thank you very much.